This is Matt Brown, and you're listening to Just a Good Conversation. I'm going to say it. Bruce Chambers was robbed. Sure, he's won a boatload of awards during his career, and he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for his photo of Mary Decker and Zolo Budd in their run-in during the Olympics in 1984. He was robbed. After years of making fantastic images, though, he refocused his life, and he's never looked back.
So he won, I think, 3 different stories won. And I looked at him, I'm like, Paul, how did you shoot all of this in a year? This comes back to my philosophy. How do you possibly put this much effort into your work? He goes, I got divorced this year. I'm like, there it is. You poured yourself into work because you don't have that connection now.
I'm Matt Brown, host of Just a Good Conversation. Take a listen to my archives. My guests have ranged from financial planners, realtors, cancer survivors, Emmy winners, and chair of photography at Art Center College of Design, Everard Williams.
It's about building trust at some point, right? And that all that trust building may happen when the person walks on set, you introduce, you have a quick conversation, and you say something inside that conversation because maybe you've done some research, you understand where they are, who they are, what they come from, and all that kind of stuff. And they realize that you all speak the same language, and they kind of relax. Because most of the time people don't want to have their picture taken. They're too busy thinking, this is going to be like my 5th grade portrait that looks ugly as hell, so I don't want to be here, right? And so, but now this person makes me feel comfortable, right? I'll give them more than the 5 minutes that I originally, and next thing you know, you're having a conversation and making images that are the real person as opposed to some manufactured, posed kind of thing.
The rest of my conversation with Everard can be found on our archives at justagoodconversation.com. Let's take a quick break for a sponsor before diving into part 2 of my conversation with Bruce Chambers.
This is about the time that I have 3 sons, and they were all like in youth sports and band and all sorts of stuff.
Just school stuff, everything that naturally children go through.
And I was missing all sorts of it, obviously, being on this rotation shift, and I'd been missing it since they were born. We all worked holidays.
And it was interesting. You guys almost all had kids about the same time, between like you and Leonard and Reitmeyer and Goulding and
yeah. And in fact, there was this right before we all had kids, everybody was okay with the rotation shift because it enriched your portfolio, your experience, because you were either the night sports guy or you're the day general reporter and all this
weekends,
stuff.
Whatever.
So nobody wanted it. And the single guys would bargain to work your holidays sometimes because they get double pay.
Yeah.
Or my Jewish colleagues would take Christmas or something.
Right.
You'd work things out. But you were always missing stuff. And it was and I was talking to my pastor, and I remember I told you earlier that I had mentors who I was always trying to please, and he wanted me to do a bunch of stuff. And he even told me one time, I should quit my job because, it interfered with what I should be doing at church. And I was like, well, what do you do after Sunday? You preach a sermon. And he's looking at me, and I go, you go home, you turn on your TV, and you watch the Laker game. Right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm sitting 3 feet from the pole, of the hoop, And I said, he goes, yeah, well, they're I go, so would you tell the Lakers not to play on Sunday? And he's like, I go, he goes, yeah, but they're professionals. I go, so am I. So we had this contentious kind of thing, but he goes, well, how could you get a set schedule? And I go, it's impossible. We don't have such a thing. So he goes, well, what is it you do better than other people that maybe you could I go, I'm the news photographer. I'm the guy who'll do the chasing. And he's like, and he goes, well, you have this shift. He goes, well, could you ask for it permanently? The Metro Dog shift. And I'm like, I could ask, but they're not going to say it, Then I realized Mike Katata had been given this deal where he could coach his kids' soccer team for the season. Of course, he paid for that because he had to sit at the desk.
Yeah,
too,
right.
Which I hated. In fact, early on when we first had email. I mean, literally first had email when it was a thing. And I didn't know what copy all meant. They sent out an email that said, "Who wants to work the desk?" And you remember, I worked 6 months at the PT back in the 80s. I never wanted to do it again. In fact, at one point, they tried to hire me, and I said, I'll take the job if you double my pay. And they're like, we'll find somebody. So they said, who wants to work the desk? And I email back all, never, niet, nada, nunca. And everybody on staff is like, what an asshole. They're like, how do you really feel about it, Bruce? And I'm like, oh, But I literally just never did it. I never did it. I always tried to keep myself out of the office, out of sight, just doing my thing. So,
did that just feel being at the desk like you were just having your life sucked out of you?
Part of it, I respect the people who do it, especially the ones that do it well. I don't respect the people I worked with over the years who aspired to be the boss and really didn't have the chops.
Right.
But
what made a good photo editor to you?
Well, somebody who trusted you, like your news judgment. Marcia Prouse was my boss, probably the longest. And, she used to question, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And, we get in arguments all the time. And we're the same age, and I was at a point in my life where saying no was okay. It was pushing the limits. And she trusted me, and she was like, she would tell me to do something, and I go, that's a freaking waste of time. How do you know? I go, 35 years of experience, 20 some years here at the register. I know that is not going to happen, and she used to call me and say, I need you to go do this thing, in the 8th hour of my 8-hour shift. And I'm like, why me? Why not so-and-so? Because I know that's who's on shift now, right? And she's like, well, because I trust you. And I'm like, well, who do you trust? She named off 3 photographers who I won't name.
Right.
Not pissed off everybody she didn't name. And I'm like, yeah, well, why don't you just fire the rest of them? She's like, what? And I'm like, well, why do you pay these people that you don't trust? Push them. So she sometimes make me do it. Sometimes she'd listen. I had a nice, the other person, Mike Pilgrim, was the assistant photo editor. Mm-hmm. He was awesome because he had been a photographer for a long time.
Right.
And so he was like, he really knew I knew what I was talking about. And so he would call me up all the time, try to get me to do some crappy thing. And I was like, no. Every now and then it intrigued me, But they always crack me up. Like, I'm in the middle of like an 8-9 year stint of doing nothing but news, and they call me up and they're like, hey, I thought maybe you'd want to do something that's like a little different pace. And I'm like, yeah, what? Well, we have this drill of like an earthquake drill. I go, wait a minute. So instead of shooting the real news, you want me to shoot the fake news?
the predetermined fake news of practice. Yeah, just garbage.
He go, yeah, you're right. I'll give it to somebody else. But what makes a good photo editor? You have to be a good editor. You have to keep your ego out of it. If you're into power over the photographer, like it's my way or the highway, I dealt with that with everybody, and they were the boss, and they had the best interest in the paper, and they knew what kind of ridiculous things would be said in those meetings where they had to try to sell something. But I think being a cheerleader for the photo staff, when it costs you something, like a lot of the bosses would not treat the photo staff well because if they were seen as productive, they would get a bonus financially. And you're like,
right.
You sold us out, So standing up for us and getting in the way, protecting us. I had a photo assistant once who called me in a panic because he'd been in one of those meetings and I was out shooting news, and he goes, "We need a picture now." It's when we are doing literally real-time photography on the web. And I would go, "Well, I haven't seen it yet." So he goes, "Well, just give me a picture of wet pavement. I don't care," because they wanted some like weather shit. I'm like, not with my name under it.
Right.
And I said, he goes, "Well, I'm under all this pressure and I have a mortgage and I could lose my job." And I'm like, "I get that." I said, "But here's what your job is. You are the protector of the photo staff. You could say, yeah, well, we'll get on it. But if I can't find it, I'm not going to invent it. If you want to go take a picture out the window, go for it." And they would literally do stuff like that. But, then I call them back an hour later and I'm like, "I just shot your front page and now you can show it to them."
Right.
Maybe they had to wait, But that standing up for the photographers, always pushing a photographer to better things. Holy cow. Sometimes a bad editor would just say, "I don't like this." But if they could say why they thought it wasn't up to your speed or your par, or, why is this not as good as what I know you can do, you needed somebody like that constantly. Because I remember I used to just get burned out all the time, and I was like, I've been doing this for 30 some years, and I'd be like, and I remember Carlson saying to me one day, I'm just burned out. And I'm like, just been doing the same thing over and over and over. And he goes, "Well, get over it, because I need a picture today." And I got a really great feature that day, and he's like, "There you go."
Was there ever a point where you said, "Okay, I've been in OC 10 years now at the Register. Would I be willing to take the kids, uproot them, and go to New York, DC,
No.
Dallas, anywhere?"
No.
You really put to rest, "I'm not looking anywhere. I'm going to make this roots for the family."
Yes, I did that. And
Was that hard to swallow?
yeah, because I knew, it was kind of like, I could have had my shot,
Right.
But
I could have been a contender.
I could have been a contender. But I was still a contender in a lot of ways. I one day I was working and they're like, "You want to go to Katrina with the FEMA team?"
Yeah, you got hours notice, right? Wasn't it?
Like 2 or 3 hours notice.
Right.
And I was like, "Well, when?" Like, in 2 hours. Basically we drive up to the tell my wife I'm leaving for an undetermined amount of time. And it was weird. It was during a war in the Middle East, so there was no planes, so we had to take a bus. And it was like, they drive up to the register and they keep putting crap in bags for me to take, and they gave me this antique satellite dish thing that never worked. I call it the boat anchor. I'm in Dallas trying to get this thing to work while we're on a layout. But I kept getting assignments like that. I got to do the 4 Olympics. 3 of them at the Register, and
did that feel weird to go from 1984, big dog at the Olympics, shooting black and white, so you're still processing film. It's very different at that time. There's thousands of photographers running all over the Olympics, and then going to 2000, and now everybody's got digital, and digital's new, and it's still kind of wonky.
Well, you had to. Like when Michael, I remember I told you, I don't want to do the Olympics back to back to back because I don't want to be hated here.
Right.
And I think I honestly do like to share. So I thought, Michael's earned this. I've known Michael Golding, since college when he was on my photo staff at the Daily Titan, and he was shooting sports then.
Right.
It's his thing. But I gave him he'd never shot an Olympics, so I kind of gave him the lowdown of how this works.
Well, he shot in 96.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, him and Paul went in 96.
Well, anyways, it's been a long time.
Right, but that was film. Again, totally different.
Well, there's a whole political system to the Olympics, too.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of like, here's how you game the system, Like, for instance, you have to schmooze, the U.S. Olympic Committee guy who's in charge of
Photo marshal, right? Yeah.
to give you tickets to select events so that you can get into some events. Like, you can't just go to every event. There's only a certain amount of photo positions, and the U.S. committee, for instance, only gets a handful of, so they give them to who they think is important. So, in 2000, I walk into the swim venue guy, and I know I have like 6 or 7 gold medalists from Orange County. And I'm like, dude, I go, I am a photographer on a 2-man team. We don't even have a photo editor. We are pushing deadlines constantly. We don't have the money of Getty or whoever, I didn't say is bribing you right now. But I go, I need a decent seat in the swim venue. And he's like, looks around like, is anybody watching? He says, come back on the first day. He goes, what do you want? I go, I want A section, which is like literally right next to the touch line at the pool. And he goes, come back. So I come back, and he does the look around like nobody's looking. He opens it up. Somewhere around here, there's a card, like a business card that says Section A on it. And people are always like, how the hell did you get that? And I go, well, I had like 300 fellow Christians praying for me. That might have something to do with it, because there's no reason that guy should have given me the thing. And I end up, he goes, just go in like everything's normal, and, you pick the seat that's open. And my seat was next to Heinz Kluntmeyer, and it was Phelps' first gold medal race. And Phelps takes off, and I'm thinking, I'm too close to the end line because I can't really get too many great shots of his stroke. And he comes in, and he's a humble guy at this point. He wins the gold medal, and I can't remember who won the bronze, but they're like 2 lanes down. And I'm looking straight into his face. I can see the reflection of the stadium in his goggles on his head. And he looks at his fellow teammate, and he gets this huge smile on his face. And I have the front page of the New York Times. It's like those kind of things constantly happen to me at the Olympics, but it was like you had to like play the game. So I don't remember where your first question was.
Well, just in that regard, I mean, first of all, if you're sitting next to Heinz, you're in a good spot.
Yes. Oh, back to Sydney. That was Athens, actually. In Sydney, I've heard that if you wanted a seat permanently, you would buy a phone line to your seat, and that all the Japanese photographers were gaming the system and buying up these seats. So I went into the same guy 4 years before and said, I have gold medalists I have to cover, and I can't stand in line and wait to get in, and then,
Right.
I said, so what's the deal? And he told me about the phone line thing. So I bought one without asking the registrar if I could spend $600, and it paid off. So
Yeah, wise idea, because the answer would
and
have
I
been
was
no.
again sitting, I was like right behind Heinz, and so 2 in a row, I did these things, but you had to learn the system. You had to, like I said before, you have to learn how to push the rules, because, like I got burned in London because by then there was some politics and money being exchanged somehow, shady, I think, where certain agencies were given inside the track passes at the track and field, and you were shooting with 800 from hoping that at the high jump that the referee would get out of the way so you could shoot, or that the Getty photographer down there wasn't, his orange vest on wasn't in your frame every single time. You just like we were joking outside about God's my grip. I was like, God, please make that guy trip right now so I can get a clean shot of this gold medal event.
Or just at least be short, not send the 6'5" guy in the giant vest.
Exactly. So, it just worked it. But,
Was it interesting, though? How was it going to Athens 16 years later digitally?
It was a pain in the butt because the digital camera at the time was like a nanosecond late.
Yeah, huge delay. Total
So I
trash.
did all of the trials, and I learned, for instance, like when the shot put guy was facing away to fire, that's how long the delay was.
Holy Christ.
And then I learned that I went to the swim trials in this chlorine bath in Indianapolis, the beautiful city of Indianapolis, where I don't know why I don't have lung cancer. And I learned how to time that delay. It was Athens when the camera was right on the money. But, not every sports picture is about timing, and sometimes it's about waiting for the reaction or, doing the graphic thing or something like that. So you could kind of get around it in Sydney. In Athens, you had a full functioning camera. But then it was like...
But by the time you go to London, you're talking a full frame.
Oh, yeah.
Not crop factor anymore.
And
Full frame.
8 frames a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your battery lasts you, through the event.
Oh, yeah, and it had tracking focus. I'll never forget. I went to kiss the ass of the Olympic guy, and he loved me because I walked in and I was like, here's my story. I didn't have a credential until 30 minutes ago, and thank you for making that happen. I walked in the media center and went straight there. And I go, and I haven't shot Olympics in 8 years. I haven't shot sports in 8 years. And I have this, Orange County contingent. Here's my superstars. I need those access. I said, and literally 3 days ago, I didn't even know I was going to be here. And he's like, wow. And people kept coming up, and he's like, listen to this story. This guy's shooting the Olympics, and he didn't even know he was going to be here, and he hasn't done it in 8 years. But the thing that sealed the deal with the guy was, I said, look, I know how this works. You get a certain amount of tickets, and I need one of them. And I need to give you justification why I need it. But here's the other thing. He goes, I know some of these big shots, like, from the bigger papers, well, say they need it, but they don't really need it. They don't even use it sometimes. I said, so I need your phone number. So, because one, I can't come in here every day because I'm a one-man band. I don't have an editor, nothing.
Was that terrifying?
No, but it was hard.
You don't have a teammate. You don't have an editor. You're 8 hours ahead.
Yeah, it was hard. For instance, when I was in Athens, the Olympic transportation system was super slow, and I was getting like 4 or 5 hours of sleep because the buses would take so long to get you back, and you'd be going like 3 a.m. trying to take a bus. I learned how to they gave us full access to the tube in London. Okay. In addition to the Olympic bus system.
That's huge.
So I learned how to game the system. I was like, one day I was laying in bed and I was like, I had shot the men's marathon at the Big Ben, and it was raining. It was a gorgeous picture. And for some reason that day, the news bumped me out, and they didn't use that picture. And I thought it was one of my favorite pictures. And I had spent like 3 hours staging and all that. And then the women's was coming up, and they were going to run right across the same thing. I was laying in bed like, 7 o'clock, and the race was like at 8:30, and I was like, crap. Or it was less than an hour. And I'm running down the street, jumping in the tube at King's Cross, making a couple connections, popping out of the tube, walking over to the thing 5 minutes before they run by, shoot the same picture, then they ran at 6 columns, And it's like, I just learned how to do it, but it was always hard. 4
Olympics in, you figured out how to work.
I figured it out. Exactly. Plus you had that real time. During the Sydney and Athens games, the delay of trying to transmit photos internationally on the phone, it was just like slow and terribly horrible. By London, you could dump, ton of photos. Then I learned other things like, you have to caption. So you're on and you have to be accurate. So, who was in the race? What was their time? What was all this? So there's this whole Olympic system of information with all that on there. But then I realized somebody said, that AP has 5 people probably that do that for their photographers. Why don't you just cut and paste their captions? And I'm like, duh. That gave me hours.
Oh, that saves you so much time and so much back relief that you could just have it filled in.
But, literally.
Yeah, that was a much easier way to do it. Otherwise, and again, really, you couldn't have someone designate as a photo editor and they can look that up. I mean, it's the women's marathon. It's not that hard to caption.
You had literally, at that point, you had Getty photographers at track level looking, in a well, looking at the finish line for that beautiful angle of people running at you, wired into a system where they never even looked at their film.
Right.
Some editor was just taking it off, sending it off, and I'm still walking around. I got to go find a computer, plug it in, download it, edit it, caption it, and it was kind of a lonely experience too. You just didn't have a social life during the Olympics. I remember two of my favorite rock star photographers having a pissy match about all this great stuff they'd done in their lives while I was working in the media room. It was like, well, I did this and I did that. It was very passive aggressive, but they were trying to
outdo one another. And you wanted to look over and say, "Shut up! I'm captioning here."
Exactly. I'm fucking working here. Excuse my French.
But take your goddamn pissing contest outside.
Yeah, I mean, come on, you guys.
Ooh, you guys shot those so and
you guys have made, you guys have an international reputation. You've made a fortune off of your business, and I'm still working for the Orange County Register.
I'm capturing women's water polo. Shut up.
Yeah, definitely.
For the love of God.
So,
go ahead.
I think, we've gone a while, but I think what changed, something changed. So you were asking about how I got to be a therapist and all of this, right? So,
I mean, that's a change in your life. That's a huge, flip of a switch.
Even though I'm working as a local photographer, made that choice to give up my career, my career goals. I didn't really give up my career goals. I just changed them.
Right.
But I lowered it from being
international playboy,
James Knockway, to Bruce Chambers. I remember every time I saw James Knockway at a convention, we'd go up and talk to him like he was God. Plus, this was the last time we're going to see him because he took so many freaking risks in life, Mm-hmm. Thank God he's still alive killing it. But I couldn't be that anymore. I was a dad.
Right.
I remember I was hiking one day. I took my son on a trail, and we were out in the middle of the Sierra, and I was walking. He was 12, my oldest son, and I was looking over a cliff, but it really wasn't. I wasn't that close, but from where he was looking, he thought I was on the edge of death, and he starts yelling at me "Knock it off! You're always taking risks." And he was getting emotional. I'm like, "Come over here!" It's there's three, and he's like, "You always do this," and he starts talking about. You go to the riots. You go to Cambodia. You go to Nicaragua. You put your life at risk. I need a dad. And I was like, that tore me up. I'm like, I didn't realize he was that scared. 9/11, I'm in bed and I come out, and just the second plane hits the Twin Towers, the phone rings. Marsha Prowse is like, "Pack your bags. You're going to New York." And I'm like, "Are you crazy?" And she's like, I go, "I don't know anything about New York. I don't, that's the capital of photojournalism of the world. I'm sure you're going to get better pictures from people who are on the ground right now." She's like, "Just do it." So I ended up going to the airport. They shut down all the flights. I don't get to go anywhere. And wasted my day. Sent me to the border for the non-photo. But Ian gets the message. Your dad went to 9/11. Well, he's in freshman in high school, So I chose to take that very stressful Metro Doc shift. In fact, that is my nickname. That's my email, because I did it for 8 years straight. And what happened was I had a boss, Jody Steck at the time, who hard ass. No, I got in so much trouble with her for my decisions. She, I don't want to do that. But I respected her. But she was like AP person, so she was like, you need to constantly be shooting pictures. Whatever, don't be resting. Go think of something else to do. Like if I was covering the Republican convention in San Diego, I need to be on the streets shooting. I'm like, Jody, I don't work for the AP, But I wanted that shift, that permanently. And I'm like, can I have the shift where I work as the Metro Dog person for like permanently? She says, no. I go, how about, well, you gave Katara a dispensation for the season so he could coach his kids. I go, how about 3 months? She goes like, all right, fine. And she goes, I still don't think it's going to be worth it, right? So by the grace of God, I was like killing it. I had like front page, local page, like every day, sometimes both, because I was set free to do news. And what I didn't say about Brusick one day, he said, the managing editor, one day he said, the photographers need to shoot pictures that demand to be printed, as if we weren't. It's really insulting, But I was like, okay, I'm going to give you pictures that you cannot deny. So I worked long hours, I worked hard, and I was kind of blessed at the time, I think, just things fell in front of me all the time. And then one day she comes in and she says, I think I'm going to let you have your way and you can be the Metro Dog. And I go, good, because here's two rolls of film. This is your front page and this is your local page. And I was right, And so I started doing it, but it wore on me. It was brutal because they kind of like the rest of the staff, a photojournalist is tasked to shoot breaking news all the time. Like if you're shooting an environmental portrait, like we were joking about, the restaurant review, and a plane crashes next door, you don't finish your job.
Hold on, I got to get this shot of the chef.
Yeah. You go do it, right?
Sure.
But even to this point, it was like, there'd be a header of smoke somewhere in North County where I was, and there might be a photographer like a block away, but he's like, Chambers will handle it. It became that, if I was on shift, they just like, oh, I don't want to do that. So
Bruce will get it.
So I was shooting like 80% of the trauma, and that gets to your soul after a while. Because I was shooting a lot of I shot a lot of house fires where people lost everything, but more importantly, I was shooting a lot of gang shootings, and I would show up and the mom would be there and her son's body's under a yellow tarp, and I got to shoot a picture that's acceptable for the breakfast rule at the Orange County Register. Mm-hmm. You don't barf in your Wheaties by this picture. And I got to talk to these people. So I'm talking to moms who just had their son shot for, some 13-year-old shot by the local gang member. And, that stuff used to get to me. And then my marriage started to really take a hit. I had 3 kids. My wife took a year off to try to be a stay-at-home mom. It's not her thing. We had a lot of tension. We needed eventually to either get divorced or go to marriage therapy, and we chose the latter. And the counselor was actually a counseling pastor at this mega church I went to, but he was he did this on the side. And he taught me how to handle my emotions, how to communicate with my wife. He taught me, how to get this back on track, how to set boundaries with my bosses. And so then, I started to become like in the communication system on the computer with the register photographers. They'd be all pissed off. I'm pissed off at the photo editor. I want to rant. So I'd like sit in my car and I'd like, yeah. And I'd be doing therapy with them, trying to keep them calm. Like a lot of them really did not like Marcia Prowse's style. Mm-hmm. But I was friends with Marcia Prowse. I just kind of understood her, right? Right. And that was part of it. I remember one time I was at was at a murder-suicide, and I knew the cops. Really, I worked it so long that sometimes the cops would lift the yellow tape up and walk me over to show me something. You know, it was ridiculous. But it took years to get that kind of status. But I remember being in a murder-suicide and talking to the detective, and I'm like, I don't know anything. I'm like way down the street, and I'm looking at positions of bodies, and I'm like, murder-suicide, right? And he's like, how the hell would you know that? You know, I'm like, well, I'm just like thinking there's a dead guy, dead woman, a dead guy. And the positions, he like shot both of them and then he shot himself.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know that? I go, well, it's a pattern,
Yeah. I saw it Tuesday.
So I started to like think about that stuff. Like I didn't just cover a murder scene or a tragedy. I started to think about how's this affecting the people? How's this, and that's better photography. I got schooled a couple times by really good photographers who would show up the same scene as I am. Like I used to try to tell people that were doing news, like if I wasn't able to cover fire, they'd send somebody else. And there'd be this giant ball of fire, like sometimes like literally blocks from register. So the photographers would practically walk there and they'd get there and they'd shoot nothing but flames. And then the editors would be like, and then the next day you'd look at the LA Times and there's the family that's affected by the fire with the flames in the background, crying, hugging. Mm-hmm. And they just like, dude, don't look at the bright, shiny thing. Go over the human angle every single time.
Right.
And, I got schooled with that a couple times, too many times. And I was like, okay, I will do that. And it was hard because I'm somewhat of an introvert. So to walk up to a complete stranger, ask them how their life is going in the worst moment of their life, that was tough.
Sure.
So I went to counseling, got my marriage back on track, started to make some boundaries in my job, telling my bosses, no, I'm not work, like 12 hours today, unless there's some upside to it. Like I'll bank those 4 hours and take them off. Give me 6 hours on some other day off. But, and then all that tension kind of changed my relationship with the church I've been going to for 25 years, and it was just toxic, and I realized that I was just being used there.
Really?
Yeah, just kind of like, I've been here for 25 years, and you still don't even know who I am, but you're telling me what to do with my life. And so I left, and I went to a big place, EV Free Fullerton. It's like a 3,000 member church.
I know that, yep.
And, I kind of restored my idea of why I was a Christian there, because it was like they talked about grace, and they when they asked you to do something, if you said no, they didn't freak out and say, well, you're not being a good Christian. And they're like, okay, I'll get somebody else to do it. I was like, wait, you can say no here? And so...
Well, I'm finding this out at work. I'm finding this out at church.
So I was like... Okay, I told my wife, we were super involved in the other church. I was the Sunday school teacher, the greeter. I was in charge of a nonprofit organization that they'd founded. I was in the choir. I was in all this stuff.
Good God, Bruce.
I was leading a small group. And I went to the new church and I go, we're not going to do anything for like a year. We're just going to sit here and kind of observe how this church works, and then find a home for like a Sunday school class. But they had this thing called gift shop, which my wife ended up teaching at one point. But it was kind of like, what are you good at? Where would you plug in best? And when I took it, they said you could either be a core group leader for high schoolers or a lay counselor. And I was like, I can't put the time in for a core group job. That's like a part-time job.
Right, that's a lot, right?
The lay counselor thing was you have one client at a time, you see them once a week, and you get trained for a year, but then you only have to go to supervision and do your job once a week for like an hour, 2 hours. I'm like, so I did that, and from the same guy who had been my...
Did it come natural?
Yeah. And, well, my wife's better at it than I am, but... I have the degree. But, you know, I did it for I think 5 years. And, you know, we didn't just counsel church members. We counseled anybody that it was free and anybody that would need it. So I had some pretty unique stuff going on. And I learned a lot from my supervisor.
Was there a point where, though, you're at the register going, I need a backup plan? Like,
Yes.
I see the writing on the wall.
Yes. That day, I think I alluded to it earlier, was...
because people had started to leave, right? So
well, they started laying people off. And I was the highest paid photographer at the register. I knew that because Marcia would remind me of that anytime I said no.
She would remind you of
No,
that.
she wasn't really
Well,
mean,
right, but
she was like, you're a highly paid person, you know. And if I complain, for the last 8 years of the register, I didn't get a raise, ever. Nobody got raises.
For 8 years?
Yeah. Well, I think 2 years at the beginning of the last 8 years, 2 years in, they cut everybody's pay, I think by 5% or something like that. Everybody got a pay cut. And then 2 years later, they gave us a 2% raise and said that we gave you a raise. I'm like, do the math. I'm not paid anymore. Still made less than I did 3 or 4 years ago. And then I never got a raise. So whenever I complained about cost of living or any of this stuff, you know,
Death
I
years.
said, what's the upside to, you know, me working my ass off, you know? You get to keep your job. I'm like, really? Why do I even bother doing a performance review every year, you know? There's no, every year I get you find maybe one thing, so I get a 4.9 out of 5, just so you couldn't give me a perfect score. Or I got perfect scores, and it never equated at those last years to any financial gain. So I knew that I could read the writing on the wall. I was working for the web at this point. I switched over, you know, and we had new bosses who were about trying to switch to digital journalism. And so they were like, you need to get clicks, you know. Well,
The OC Post, remember that?
Yeah.
Wonderful idea.
Every click you get on the web, we pay attention to. We have a company that checks that. Good upside and bad side to that. I proved to the bosses that breaking news was important because I was the leader in the clicks for the register. The guy who was the second was a guy who took pictures of women with cleavage in bars and did bar reviews. So, okay, sex sells and news sells, right?
You should have done bar reviews.
I know. I would have just been I had millions of clicks, you know. Most people had hundreds of thousands, you know.
Well, they say it's puppy dogs and boobs. That's what drives the, Instagram.
Well, I was not really proud of the fact that all I did was breaking news, you know.
Right.
I was getting to the point where it was this is kind of shallow, but I like the shift. And by this time it moved all the way down to 6 to 2 instead of 9 to 6. So I literally, you know, started my driveway and ended my driveway, and then I had the rest of the day, you know. So I had all these other things I could do, including grad school. So at one point, I was talking to my supervisor at church, who had been my marriage therapist, you know, and he's a licensed therapist. And I said something about, you know, I need a backup plan. I don't think that journalism is going to get me through my career. And if it is, I'm going to hate life the way it is now. Mm-hmm. And you could see there was a moment I was sitting in the Olympics, and I'm in London, and I'm doing some edit, and Mindy Shower, or I think it was Mindy or Cindy Yamanaka, Mindy or Cindy. And one of them says, hey, this guy just bought our paper. He's going to pour money into it. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. And I'm like, well, I have plan B, and it's staying in place. Good luck with that. You know, I'm not buying it. And yeah, they poured everything into that place and went bankrupt. And you know, the day came. I did go to grad school. I had my friend, who's my mentor in counseling, say, you know, I will help you. He literally had this lay counseling program for 30 years, and he had 30 lay counselors who had gone and got licensed. That is a huge endeavor. You have to get a master's degree, and you have to do a 3,000-hour internship. And in this world, in Orange County, you probably won't even get paid for your internship. So you have to work that while you're working a full-time job, or you have to be married to somebody with money. So he says, I will help you as best I can if you want to do that. So I started the program. I had a 5-year program. And I graduated in 13. And in 14, I was doing a part-time internship and working. And Michelle Carden was very gracious because she was the boss, and she knew that mental health was a big issue. One, because she's an awesome person in that way, but also, you know, being the boss, she saw the stress of people losing their jobs and was like worried about their welfare. And a couple of times she asked me, like, you know, this person's getting laid off. I don't think they're going to handle it well. What do I do? Who do I have them go see? That kind of stuff. But she created just a place for me to go to my supervision in the middle of my shift. I had to go to supervision like at 2 o'clock or like 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And Kenny Steinhardt would cover me, and they just, you know, he was doing half the county, but he loved to come back up north. Sure. Because that's where everything happens. So he would cover me, and I would literally like go to my supervision sometimes. And this is the best part. In my first internship, it was a place called Mariposa Women's Family Center in Orange. The boss in charge of the supervision and education that we all had to have used to work for the Dallas Morning News. And she talked me in at this like job fair to applying at her place. I thought, do you even have guys that work there? And she's like, yeah, we have 2, you know, you could be the 3rd, you know? So I would come in, and I was allowed to sit at this table with that they over hired that year. They only hired like 2 people a year, and I was one of those 2, but then they decided to hire like another 15 people so that they could expand their services, which ended up almost bankrupting them. But I would come in with my computer, and I'd be sitting there, and they weren't even allowed to touch their phones while they were at the table, and I'm like posting. And she's like, Bruce is the exception to the rule because he has a deadline. I understand it. And they're like, well, what are you doing? And I'd flip it around, be a murder scene. They're like, you know.
Jesus, Bruce.
And I'd be like, I like literally would sometimes walk away from a murder scene or something like that and have to go in and sit in a room with somebody grieving as a therapist, you know. So that was a rough place because I was being traumatized in the field, and then I come in and have to be the therapist. And it actually did me a disservice as a therapist at first. Like my supervisors are like, you know, they would watch your work. You'd like have to record it, you know. And they're like, why did you just skip off from the thread you were talking about right there? That's just bad therapy. That person, you could have taken that down into a very cathartic place. Why did you skip? And I'm like, I have no idea. And my boss is like, perhaps because you don't want to touch your own trauma. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe, you know. So they're like,
2 points.
They're like, you need to go to your own therapist. And so I started seeing a therapist while I was being a therapist, which helped. And plus, they kind of gave you a bonus on your hours. Every hour you sat with a therapist, you got 3 out of your 3,000. So the last year, I did like quite a few hours that way and shortened up my internship. But I was like at the register. One day they sent me an email, you know, to everybody on the photo staff. You're going to have to take 2 weeks without pay, as the paper was spiraling out of control financially. And I'm like, okay, well, I already have a 2-week vacation. I guess I'm just going to do that on my own. And they said, and then I get another email or text, whatever. You need to come to the paper. And they're like, go up to this meeting room. On a floor we don't usually come in. And we're all sitting sitting around the table with every photographer and artist at the newspaper. And Curly, his first name, I know two Curlys, I'm trying to remember. Curly, the managing editor, walks in. He's in tears. And he's like, they just told me, meaning the owners of the paper, that they're going to lay off 40% of the editorial staff of this newspaper unless we can get buyouts. And here the buyout deal is thus. And it was a crap deal.
Sure.
But it was better than it got later. And you will get a text from HR if you're eligible. And at one point in the meeting, you heard ding, 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 because our staff was veteran staff, and everybody there pretty much had been there for 20 years, and they're like, get rid of these highly paid people. So
yeah, there's Leonard and Mark. And
we're walking back to the photo area, which they had laid so many people up. They got rid of the photo lab at one point and made us sit in the newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had fired so many people in the library that they allowed us to work in there because we didn't even have desks half the time. At one point, I was sitting in the aisle in the aisle on the way to the managing editor's office with my laptop, sitting up against the wall, and my boss is like, "Get up!" And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Because Tawny, the managing editor, is going to walk by here and see you." And I go, "That's why I'm sitting here.
Let her see.
Let her see how my working conditions are. This is how you treat photographers. You gave everybody else a desk, but because they sit at their desk and use their phones to do their stories, but they don't hardly ever go outside, But us who, So eventually I moved into my car and never went there except on an expense check day. But I'm walking out of that meeting. Everybody's demoralized, and I remember Mindy Shower saying, "Well, at least one person in here has Plan B." And I'm like, "Well, this wasn't my plan. My plan was like to do another 2 years of slow part-time supervision and then quit." But so I was prematurely outed because the deal was take the buyout or take the consequences. If you don't take the buyout and we decide to lay you off, you'll get like 2 weeks pay instead of like 24. So I took it. And it was hard, As I said, I had an existential crisis. I remember I went to supervision for my counseling job. First I called my boss, who's another hard ass. And I was like, her idea of doing supervision was to see if she could break your spirit by humiliating you. And she broke a lot of young people's hearts and then kicked them out of the agency because they couldn't hack it. But I called her and I'm like, "Do I have any job security here? Because you're not, as an intern, you're not on staff."
Right.
So she's like, "Well, with me you do. I don't know about the rest of the people who make those decisions." So the next day I get laid off. I go in the supervision and I'm sitting there and I'm looking kind of glum. And she's like, "What's wrong with you?" I go, "You're a psychologist. Figure it out. Yesterday, I was a world-renowned photojournalist. Today, I'm only a marriage family therapist intern. And I'm probably never going back because there's no jobs, at least ones that I want to work, So she's like, "Well, maybe you should go get some medication." I'm like, "Oh, thanks for that."
Yeah.
So I made that switch prematurely in my game plan, but, I was able to, I sucked it up for an entire year financially. My wife, fortunately, has a good job. We, like you were talking about earlier off mic, about saving. I had saved like 10% of my salary my whole career from about 30 on. So I had a decent nest egg. And, despite the fact that photojournalism doesn't pay. So I made that shift and I quickly finished my internship, got licensed, took the test, which was the most brutal test I've ever taken in my life. And I mean, it's sort of like a 4-hour test. You get one pee break, and you know, it's like timed, and it's these huge scenarios where you have to figure out answers that could be this or that, you know. And it's like, I thought I'd failed it. I actually passed it, but first time. But I was like so traumatized by that like a week after I passed the test, I like just fell down and fainted one day. And then I went to the doctor, and I'm like, "You have any stress in your life?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Where do I start?
Yeah. So I worked myself into a full-time practice for like 3 years, I think it was. Let's see. No, yeah, about 3 or 4 years. And I used to be able to work out of my house, near my house, not out of my house, in Brea. And it was a short drive. And, you know, I sometimes would be working from like 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. I didn't see clients back to back to back, but I'd see a client and have to do paperwork. Then a client wouldn't show up. You know, it's just like, I never made any money at it. It was like maybe, you know, I make about half of what I made at the register. But it was important work. Like, we kind of had this philosophy when I was in grad school that if I didn't even get a job, I would at least be the most efficient lay counselor that the church had, you know. And my goal was to save marriages, and my master's thesis was in infidelity recovery, which in the Christian church is this huge stigma.
Why is that?
Well, because adultery is like this quote-unquote sin that has been raised above all others.
Okay.
You know? So if you cheated on your husband or wife, you were shamed in the church, and they didn't know what to do with you. But the guy who mentored me pretty much wrote the book on the subject, and even became a therapist. And he had already been a pastor, became a therapist because his like lead pastor 2 times in a row had cheated on and left the church. So he's like, I got to figure out how this happens, why this happens. And he kind of wrote the book on it and trained me on it. So I spent 3 years saving people's or trying to save people's marriages. Some I didn't save, but, you know, and then I did all other sorts of stuff with like suicidal teenagers and just people with major problems. I saw a lot of people with, like, as I said before, existential crisis. What do I do with this part of my life? Like, I'm 50-something. This is like a very typical thing that happens. You know, midlife crisis. I'm 50. I've worked. I've raised a family. I've done this work. Have I done anything of note? Right? What should I do now? Or I'll never do it. You know, so just like helping somebody reinvent or believe in themselves. And then, of course, tons of trauma clients.
Yeah, I mean, October 1st, 2017, you know, there's a Vegas shooting, and you take part in healing lots of people. That was unbelievable.
Well, that was a privilege, and I was having a conversation. I read about it around midnight on Sunday, I think it was, and then on Monday I had to go to work, and I was talking to my wife, and, you know, we were like, typically we'll give some money for a relief fund, you know, and so we're kind of talking about that. She goes, I heard on the radio that some therapist is offering free therapy, and I'm like, well, duh, you know? So I call my boss. It's a Christian agency. I put that in air quotes. I call my boss, and I get the office manager, who's worked there for 30 years. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to offer free therapy for trauma clients because trauma needs to be dealt with in the first day or two, or it sinks in and messes people up even worse. And she says, well, that sounds like a good idea to me. You should probably, you know, text the boss and make sure that that's okay. And I go, okay. So I text him, and then I start doing it. And I do it for like 3 days, and then he's like, I just heard that you're doing this. You should have probably asked me. And I said, I did. He He goes, I never got the text. I go, what's your phone number? Wrong phone number. Old phone number. He goes, well, we would have probably run that through the board and decided what we were going to do about it. And I'm like, dude, and I used to get in trouble for this because I was the oldest guy working there practically. I'm like, and this guy's younger than me. I'm like, that if I waited for your board to figure that out, we would never help anybody. We need to get on it. So he says, well, come to an all staff meeting on Friday and we'll talk about it. In the meantime, somebody else had started to do it. So I was considered kind of a rookie compared to some of these people. And they're like, well, yeah, you can do it. But later they were trying to figure out how they could still make money at it by having like churches pay for it or something like that. And then they wanted to shut it down after a month. And we're like, these people are still coming in the doors, the huge amount of people from Orange County.
Yeah, hundreds, right? Hundreds of people probably.
Were from here. And I actually knew, I found out how many people I knew through Facebook and Instagram and all that.
That were there?
That I knew. So I literally had it the first time I ever did it, the first night, I had maybe 4 people. The next night, I had an inkling that it was going to be a lot of people. And I had a fairly large office. And group therapy is okay, but if there's too many people and people don't get to say anything, it needed to be a certain size. So I have a friend who is, to this day, a rockin' trauma therapist. And we went through our same cohort and all that. And so I asked her if she could come. She's like, yeah. So we just happened to have 2 big offices open that night. We split the group in half, and we saw about, 25 people that night.
Wow.
And then, then some people were okay with their one session. Other people kept coming back. Then, and the word got out. And I saw people for about a month. And, just like any other company, just like anything I've ever done, they're like, this is what great things we did last year. We offered free therapy. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I worked under the tension of that job for 3 full years. They're always kind of mad at me because I didn't want to have 40 clients, or I didn't want to, I had a friend, for instance, who he's a great therapist, but he had 30, 35 clients. And this is an incredibly ridiculous caseload. I was more like 20 at the peak. So I think when you have that many clients as a therapist, you're doing okay therapy, but not great therapy, because you really are just processing people in and out. You're not thinking about it that much. You're doing your paperwork. And yes, if you're a veteran, you could probably get away with it. He was so great because they had a sliding scale, and they wanted us to stick to us. And they did want us to do some pro bono kind of work and, give some people breaks. But they always kind of wanted you to make enough money. Mm-hmm. And he was making a fortune because he was giving everybody a low fee, but he had so many clients that he was super popular, so he was busy. But he worked 24/7.
Oh, Jesus,
It's insane. And I used to go over and bounce on, we do consulting ethically where we don't give out names, but I have this case. What do you think about this? We consult with each other all the time. And I just did that for years, and I was like, I can tell you one of my existential crises was there's the stage fire that burned down the San Gabriel is probably worse than they've ever burned. Happened while I was an intern about 3 or 4, I don't know how many, after I left the register. And I walked out of my office in Orange and looked across the parking lot, and my adrenaline rose because there's this header on the mountains that looked like somebody dropped a nuclear bomb. It was huge. And I was like, okay, I'm in mode. How do I get there? How do I get through the lines? How do I get past the blockades? How do I put the clothes on? How do I keep myself safe? How do I get the pictures back? All that. And you don't work for the paper anymore. you don't have to do a damn thing, you know? And it was a relief and a grieving, because it was like, okay, you're not important in this system anymore, you know?
Letting it go.
That was kind of hard, you know? But I was doing important work, and, you know, I only worked 5 years as a professional therapist, but as a, you know, licensed. But, you know, I can look at dozens and dozens of families that would have fallen apart if they hadn't come see me or another therapist.
Right.
And so there's long term to that. But basically, end of the story with my careers was I've been hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which is this 2,650-mile trail from Mexico to Canada, for decades. I would take like a week off and hike 100 miles of it. I started out by doing the John Muir Trail, which is 220 miles, which was probably my top 5 assignments of the register. I used to bug Marcia all the time, my boss. I want to do this trail. Well, how long is it going to take? 3 weeks. And I want to take 4 weeks just to make sure I get it in there. And she's like, I had 4 weeks of vacation at this point. And she's like, you can't do it. I'm like, no, why not? You're not allowed to be gone for 4 full weeks at a row. I'm like, why not? Because you're too valuable to be gone that long. People don't do your job well. I'm like, so I'll never get to do it. And she's like, don't ever say never. And I think a year went by, and she finally said, I have a proposal. How about you do it as an assignment? I give you 2 weeks to do it, and you take 2 weeks of vacation, and, you know, just go do it.
Call it even.
Yeah.
Just go.
Then we argued for years about whose rights the photos were, you know.
Oh, here it starts.
Yeah. But I did that assignment, and, you know, that was the first time they ever wanted to put photos in the hallway, and they were going to rotate it every month. This picture's hung there for a year and a half because nobody wanted them to come down because it was beautiful. And my bosses loved it. And, you know, I won a bunch of awards for it, and it was personally fulfilling. But the weird part is 9/11 happened like a week after I finished practically, or close to that. And, well, just as I was preparing the story for publication, 9/11 hits, and they just forgot about the story for like the next 6 months. They published it the next month, and then I won some decent awards for it, and, you know. But then I started asking them if I could have a week off. Then I decided, then I found the book for the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Pacific Crest Trail starts at the Mexican border, and you walk through the desert. And I'm like, well, originally I had seen that, and I'm like, screw that. I'll just do the cherry on the top of the sundae, which is the John Muir Trail, right?
I'll skip right to the good stuff.
Yeah, so I did that. But then I was like, maybe I'll just start doing sections close to the, you know. And I had, like, partners that like to hike. Some were photographers, some weren't. I had a cousin who helped me. Eventually found an older guy that was hiking it that I did lots of it with. And then finally, I had done half of it. I had in 2019, I had about 4 or 5 little hikes, day or two, across California up to Tahoe that I needed to connect the dots. And I did them all, because now I was like, I could get my weekends off. You know?
You can get out of here on Friday night and get up there?
Yeah, I did not work on Friday. I had 3-day weekends. So I worked like 40 hours, 4 days a week. And so I got up there, did it. And then I was talking to a younger friend. I've been in all sorts of, like, I have 4 friends that were in a men's group that we used to get together every week for years. And the younger guy says, you know, Bruce, you're not getting any younger. When are you going to finish the Pacific Crest Trail? And I was thinking about that. He's like, I go, damn, he's right. I'm like,
Thanks for reminding me.
90. I'm like, 19. I'm like 63 years old or something like that. 62. And I'm like, I think I'll do it in one shot, 1,500 miles. So rather than ask my bosses, who don't like me anyways, because I'm always saying my mind, and, you know, they're not used to that, because young hardly paid interns starving for hours, and this is the place they need to be, are very obedient. And I'm like, I think the way you do things is messed up, and I would speak my mind, So I said, I am going to go do this thing. In fact, the guy I told you about who worked like 24/7 was like, he was a marathoner. He was an Ironman, but he was like, I'm all behind what you're doing. I wish I could do it. Maybe he was a couple years younger than me. Maybe in a couple years I'll be able to give all this up. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So
Sure.
people were like, literally, I had scored my own office, and it was one of the best offices, and people were like looking at my door all the time, like measuring the drapes, I hear you're leaving, and I did not ask my bosses if I could do it. I just told them I was doing it. So I was like, just so you know, my therapist, my pastor, my wife, my doctor, and myself all think this is a good idea. So I'm going to do it. And they're like, well, God bless you. We can't offer you a job. We can't offer a guarantee you'll have a job when you go back. So I did go do my hike, and that's another whole podcast probably. But I was gone for 100 days, hiked my 1,500 miles, came back. And while I was on the trail, I thought about the fact that I have 3 sons who are now all adults, and 2 of them had kids, and I didn't spend enough time with them. And my father died when he was 58, and I'm like now 60-something, and I'm like, he didn't spend any time with me. And I'm like, okay, well, I am willing to go back to work part-time, but very part-time, and I need to help. Like, for instance, I have one son who is having a hard time keeping a job, and he has kids, and that just messed it all up. Like, he and his former partner have this kid, and if she's working, somebody's gonna watch the kid, so who's gonna give up, So I'm like, I'll take that hit. I will be the grandpa who watches, so you can launch yourself. So I offered them this pretty sweet deal, I thought. Like, I'll work part-time, I will up my skills in this area, I will train the rest of the staff on this thing. They're like, sorry, no thanks. Because basically an intern makes more money than a licensed therapist, because the way they take, when you're an intern, you get 20% of your fees, and they get 80. When you get licensed, it flips, and you get 80, and they get 20. So interns make more money than for the company, right? Well, it's on them. They pretty much lost their shirts during COVID, but I was retired at that point, kind of prematurely. So it was kind of like my wife's still working full time. At one point, everybody moved out of the house at one point. One of them's back, but it's kind of like puttering around my house. What am I going to do?
Well, you're still taking pictures.
Well, I still took pictures, and then COVID hit 6 months later, and I was locked down, so I was taking pictures of my garden, and we joke about that because, I'm not a garden photographer. And people who never saw my, new Facebook friends think I'm a garden photographer. But
wow, he's really good taking pictures of flowers and bugs.
Yeah. Well, as we said before, my process. You were talking about my process. So I was on the trail one day, and I carried a little Canon point and shoot, with some controls, and shoot raw. And I just shot cards, and I just banked them. And I would share iPhone photos while I was on trail, but when I was done, I downloaded all that stuff, put it on my website, and probably 10 people have looked at. But, everybody was celebrating what I was doing. It was kind of fun, but somebody asked me, well, what is it about hiking that you like the best? And I go, I hike to photograph. I don't photograph just because I'm here. I said, photographing all of this is why I'm here. I could have probably done the 1,500 miles in 80 days or 70 instead of taking my time all the time to stop and photograph things. But they're like, well, what do you like about photography? And I had to think about what's the best thing about photography. And I was like, you always get that question. I'm sure you do. What's the best picture you ever took? I'm like, I'm not answering that question because I really don't have a favorite. There's like, a couple thousand pictures and that would come to that conclusion. What's the worst thing that ever happened to you? All that stuff. But I kind of got to this place where I'm like, it's about light, and it's about a search for light. It's about using light right. It's just about being there and experiencing it and being prepared to record it when you see it, and that's kind of part of the beauty of being a decent photojournalist. But then now I'm doing landscape, it's kind of like, okay, and very few people in your pictures, and but I still think that way, I just shot a parade the other day in my neighborhood, and published it on Facebook, and like, yeah, I didn't get paid for it. I got it, a lot of people liked it, but it was just fun, It's like, okay, look at this gorgeous backlight, and there's like the bubble machine on. Let's shoot, wow,
Still got the old journalism dog in you.
Yeah. So, people are like, oh, it must be sad to have like all those credentials and that experience, and now you shoot for Facebook. I'm like, no.
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that. Been a therapist. Major life point is to be a grandpa right now and travel like unbelievably all the time, and not complaining, and I still do therapy in a sense. A couple times a week on Mondays, I go to, I'm a community pastor at my church. It's a small church. In fact, I'm teaching this Sunday for probably only the third time in like 7 years, but so when we're done here, I have to hit the books. But
Homework.
But I'm a community pastor, and at one point our church was about 400 people, and they had 12 or 13 community pastors, and my wife's one as well, where we would just be tasked to come along people who were suffering through something. And since I'm a therapist, I kind of had to step up on that than some of the other people. But we had a whole bunch of therapists in our church at one point. But now we're down in a small 50, 60 member, all volunteer church. We don't have a paid staff. So the community pastors haven't had a lot to do during COVID. I mean, we have a couple of funerals, a couple of lost children, childbirth deaths, things, some very sad things, but, people's parents dying. But one day I got a call from this low-income housing place in Fullerton where most of the people live there are firmly homeless, and they're on some subsistence. And it was during the height of COVID, and I got a call from the social worker who we were like kind of helping out with finances and stuff like that. And she's like, can you send one of your community pastors out here? I got a guy who's drinking himself to death, and I can't get through to him. And, she's a full-on social worker, but she's not a therapist.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. So I go out there, and he was gone that day. I talked to him a week or two later. He was in the hospital, but then she started introducing me to people. And for 3 years now, I've been going there once a week and just listening usually. And I've developed relationships with like 50, 60 people there. Some have died. Some have moved on. But, that's my thing. And then on Monday nights, I have a Facebook, a Zoom group therapy group originally for my church, but just a collection of people now. And I might do another one, but it's like, that keeps me in, I have my licenses renewed and current. So if I need money, I could go back and start a practice. But I'm unlike you, Matt. I am not a salesman, a freelancer. I always loved the fact that my paycheck just showed up
every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and so the whole idea of running a practice gives me the creeps. Plus, God bless them. Therapists are responsible for the lives of their clients. And you don't hardly get time to think about, like, take time off from them.
Right.
So that's rough. That's why I did the hike in the first place, because it was like, I just need a break. This has been toxic anxiety, pressure for 35 years as a photojournalist and 5 years as a therapist, and I just need a break.
Did that really kind of wipe things away for you? Kind of a clean, not totally clean, but give you a relief?
It certainly did, yeah. It was like, if you're walking through the forest for 100 days with your backpack on and all your personal belongings that you need to live with in a bag, you have a completely different perspective on things. Plus, I didn't have any other responsibilities. My wife was kind of freaking out, but I kind of told her, now's my time, you know. I've made concessions my whole career for you. Now you need to just suck it up a little bit. And she did. But yeah, your head gets clearer and you think things out. If I'm out for a week or two, I usually come up with some brilliant idea. It doesn't always work out, but
It's brilliant.
it's brilliant. You know, but it usually has something to do with you're not being true to yourself, or you're not, you know, you're people pleasing, or you're not fulfilling your destiny as a father, a husband, a friend. You know, you need to do better, or you're not taking care of yourself well enough, so you need to do better. So.
Now, you mentioned this early on, that you gave up 2 rolls of film in your life.
Mm-hmm.
What was the second roll of film?
Okay, so the first one was to the Sandinista Capitan,
Uh-huh.
who's going to shoot me if I didn't give the role. The other one was to an admiral in the U.S. Navy. It was just dumb. It was like, this is when Long Beach had a naval shipyard, and they're like, hey, we're going to take you on a bus tour, and the admiral's going to, you know, be the speaker and all this stuff. And we're like cruising around, and we're shooting out bus windows and stuff. And we go cruising by, I think it was the USS John F. Kennedy or something, like an aircraft carrier in dry dock. So the whole ship is exposed. And I just shoot up some pictures of the boat. And he's like, I think there's some secret stuff under the waterline that you probably shouldn't have photographed. Give me the film. And I was like, no. And he's like, you know, you don't invite a journalist on a press thing and then tell them to give you the film.
Right.
You should have said that up front, you know, like, don't photograph this or that, you know. And he says, well, I'll make you a deal. I will have it processed and have it back to you. We'll check it, and you can have it back by deadline. And I'm like, okay. So that one I gave away, but I got the film back. The other one, I was lucky not to get, like, disappeared.
Yeah. Never to be heard from again.
But, yeah, there are many, you know. If you're a photojournalist, you're going to have people demanding your film, erase your photographs, threaten to punch you in the face.
All the time.
All the time.
It's a normal thing.
Yeah. Because, like, you're in the park and you go, oh, look, 2 lovers. Well, they're not married to each other.
Whoopsie.
Oops. And they come screaming, running at you, you know?
Who knew?
Yeah.
I am glad that my dad worked at the Long Beach airport, and I got to see through those 80s that Long Beach paper and see your work.
Well, I have to tell the story of how we met.
You can tell the story, but I got to piggyback off that paper and see you through those years, and it was fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So this young guy comes to the register. I don't know what your role was, but, you know, in the day of sports, as I said earlier, you didn't get to stay for the whole game. You had to run back on deadline. So maybe in a baseball game, I always joke, you know, if you're playing a Canadian team, there's 2 national anthems that cut like 10 minutes out of your...
There's 2 minutes.
Yeah, they cut out your time. You're like, oh. But anyways, it was early in the season of the Angels, and, you know, I literally covered like entire Dodger seasons and Angel seasons, Duck seasons, but I'm never a big fan of baseball. Even though, no, not hurt your feelings, since I know you're just a baseball guy, the baseball guy now. But Matt wanted to go with me to the game, so I'm like, okay, fine. So we're in the third base dugout, and we're pushing deadline. We're shooting black and white film, I think, and there's only like 2 or 3 plays that were of note, and so Matt, we gotta go. So we go back to the register. I process my film. I don't remember if we used to make a print or just mark it and say, here's the thing, And I find my second base slide picture from third base, and that's the picture I'm going to give them. And then Matt comes out with his film, and it's a better picture of the same damn thing. And I'm thinking, okay, man up, So I go back to the sports department. I go, this is your picture. Credit it with Matt Brown. And then Matt, I was like, I gave him the biggest Christmas gift ever because the next day, my mom saw my picture in the paper, and I totally, that was like so fun for me because I always loved having any input in getting people excited about the job and doing and so, yeah, that was one of those times where the competition was like, this isn't important. This guy outshot me. Anybody can outshoot anybody on any given day. Being the best is a fallacy. It's just, there's no such thing.
Right. It was always a pleasure to work with you. I cannot drive by the 91 freeway at the In-N-Out in Corona and not think about you saying, that's the In-N-Out I always eat at, because if I go any further, I'm inside Orange County and the register won't pay for it.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, that's our In-N-Out, because we ate there that day after covering something in Riverside.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. The register was so, if you step 1 foot over the county line, we don't want the picture, It was like, but the funny thing is all my editors from the East Coast, and they didn't even know what Orange County was. Oh, yeah. So they didn't even know La Habra was part of Orange County.
None.
One time my boss said she was going to take her daughter to Cal State Fullerton for something at night, and I looked at her and I go, at night? And she was from like Dove Canyon,
Well, I had an editor from the New York Times call me on a Friday at like 3:00 asking if I can get up to Cal State or Santa Barbara for a 7:00 basketball game. And I was like, yeah. You rent me a helicopter? Like, there's no way. She's like, well, on MapQuest, it only says, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't show you 5:00 on a Friday. Like, not a chance in hell.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I ended up, I said at night, and she was like, was it dangerous? And I'm like, I furrowed my brow and then said, no, it's not. It's a completely safe place. It's where I live. I live like literally 3 miles away. And I go, come on, you don't even know the county,
None.
And they were so South County biased because they all lived in South County.
Oh, yeah.
And they used to always say, how come you're never down here? And I go, because nothing breaks. Nobody shoots anybody. Everybody's too busy at their jobs paying for their mortgage in South County.
Right.
And
what's exciting in Aliso Viejo?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, it's funny because I said everything happens in North County because that's where the crime is. That's where old wealth is. That's where old things break. That's where that's where the culture is, But on top of that, and then Irvine, which is the safest city in America, started having the most bizarre crimes on the planet. These wacky people, guys burying secret things in their yard, murders by, twin sisters. It was just,
weird stuff.
Weird stuff. I was like, okay, North County is where everything happens, but the weirdest stuff
happens there.
Happens in the safest city in America. And then they would try to block us from covering it because they didn't want their reputation to go.
Of course not. You got to make that safest city logo every year.
I used to have, we had some freelancers that literally were banned from Irvine. The cops would meet them at the gate practically. Get out of my city.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Don't make my city look bad.
I can't thank you enough for this. This has been awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're just been a huge influence in my life. Like I said, looking at the stuff early, working with you at the paper. We covered Super Bowls and Rose Bowls together, all kinds of crazy stuff. It's been a blast.
Well, I'm glad you're still doing it.
I know, one of the few, right? I still have a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, if you could shoot something right now, what would you shoot?
The Olympics.
Yeah?
Yeah. I cannot tell you.
You go to Paris?
Oh, in a heartbeat. I am going to Paris in I think next year to take my granddaughter on her first grandkid visit because she's going to special arts school and she's a drama person and, she's a designer and what other city would be best for that. So, but I don't know. When John Williams' music plays the Olympic theme, I get a different feeling than I've ever got before because that is a special time. Just being in the stadium when the 100's going to go off or something like that. It's just, it transcends the Super Bowl. It transcends any sports world championship.
Right. You've been there 17 days. You're next to some guy that speaks, French and some guy that's from, Brazil and another guy from the whole world's there covering it.
I was standing in a gymnastics thing in the London Olympics. I was so clueless about sports. I remember Peter Reed Miller had shot the cover of Sports Illustrated, I guess, of the American team. I walk in, I haven't been prepared, and I walk up to him during practice and say, "Which one's the American team?" He looks at me like I'm the biggest dumb shit on the planet, and he says, "The one in pink." And I'm like, "Thank you." But I still, that was my last best favorite assignment. It's just, and then I was like at the gymnastics, and I'm like, everybody turns around, and now I'm in the groove. I've remembered how to do this. I'm shooting the gold medal performances of, the American ladies won that year. And everybody's turning around, and like this guy from Africa standing next to me, and he says, "Well, what's everybody looking at?" And I said, "The princess." "The princess of what?" I said, "England." She's 2 rows back. It's just a trip, and I that he didn't even know. That's so beautiful. He doesn't know that's the princess of it.
Totally unaware.
Yeah. I love that. Where else are you going to find that?
Right. Only in sports.
He's there because, some gymnast from Africa is in the competition somehow.
Hey, he might not even have been assigned to it. Some other guy with a heart murmur was assigned to it, just like you. Next thing you know, he's at the Olympics.
That's right. He was...
He was going to do something through
he
the
was
Sierra.
A garden photographer.
He's like, what the hell? I don't shoot this. Yeah. Not bad. You're the best, Bruce. I can't thank you enough, buddy.
Thank you.
All right. Let's do it again. We'll do just one on just hiking, trails.
Sure.
Okay. You got it.
All right.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of my conversation with Bruce Chambers. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button, become a subscriber to this podcast. Remember, you can follow the Just a Good Conversation podcast on Instagram, and you can find all of our past shows on the website at justagoodconversation.com. Thank you for listening.